So I don't normally do trigger warnings, but this book even affected me in a very strong way. I'm a childless, middle-aged male. So if you had sort of a troubled childhood, or if you've had experiences, or even if you've had children, or if you just were a young girl at one point, just be warned, this is a whole book about child abuse. So yes, Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. I don't even know where to begin. It's, I literally don't know where to begin. So this is a book about a child predator destroying the life of a little girl. I've read horrible things before. I've read murders, I've read rapes, I've read all kinds of horrible stuff. But usually what the author does is they don't... Stephen Erickson's the perfect example. He's written some horrific stuff. But what he does is he always pulls back from it, and he always describes it in a very clinical way so that you know the events are happening, but it's not reveling in it. It's not glorying in it. It's not using it for titillating purposes or to provoke emotion. It's, well, other than emotions of disgust and horror. But this author has a totally different method. So this book is written from the perspective of the predator. So our narrator is the one describing these events to us. And so at times it does feel like it is just glorying in the detail, in the disgusting details of what this man does to this child. But it has to be said that the author who chose to present the material in this way, the author has to be a genius of an author, because the whole book is written and narrated from the perspective of and by this horrible man. But throughout the whole book, you never once feel bad for him or sort of come along to his side or be like, oh, I sympathize with him or I empathize with him. And I think it takes a brilliant author to have an entire 300-page book written from a perspective of someone that you loathe the entire time. You don't get used to this character and see their perspective, and the whole time you just know this is a horrible person. And I'd love to read more Nabokov after this. If anyone can recommend me another Nabokov book that is about a different subject material, but the author is just brilliant. The wordplay and the humor and the turn of phrase in this book is really good. It's really funny in parts, which is so strange with the dichotomy of the wittiness of it with the horrible subject matter. It doesn't make you laugh or smirk, but in any other setting it would. And the author's Russian, but the book's written in English, but it has a lot of French in it as well, because the narrator is Swiss. And it's just amazing to me what this author can do with the English language, being not a native English speaker. So yes, I'd love to read more Nabokov, and yeah, I think the author is brilliant. But the book is challenging. It is hard. So like, maybe I should have known going into this, but I don't like true crime. I don't like murder mysteries. I'm not gonna get any. I don't like horror movies. Like, I'm not gonna get any pleasure from the suffering of others. But here I am reading this book, and it's targeting children, one child in specifically, but also children, like many different children. Which just like children are, I don't want to say our most valuable resource, but they are the very embodiment of both innocence and potential. Because they haven't fully developed a mind, they live in a very primal, very simple terms where they experience very simple emotions. And so they do have a sort of innocence, but also a potential. You have no idea what each child could be or could do when they grow up. Anything wrong done to any child is so wrong because it removes that potential. But also children are not just valuable for their potential future economic value or as members of our future harmonious society. Childhood itself is probably one of the most valuable experiences that a human being can have. Like in an ideal perfect childhood, you should have no worries. You don't think about the future. You live in the moment. You just experience things. Everything is new. Everything is novel. Everything is exciting. I mean, you're learning things. Everything is... Maybe it's just me because I had like the perfect childhood. We didn't grow up in a rich family at all, but I was loved. I never once experienced any kind of abuse at all. And to me, the childhood was sort of the peak of my life. It was everything I could have asked for. So taking that away from a child is just the most reprehensible crime a human can commit. And one of the arguments Humbert makes in this novel is that he gives lots of examples of people in the past, who classical examples and medieval examples of people who married or loved young girls, 12-year-old girls, what have you. And I mean, it's true that in the past, like in certain cultures, and I'm sure today as well, being 12, starting puberty is the age at which you're ready for marriage. But our society today has advanced, and I will say advanced, to the point where we have sort of created and extended this thing called childhood. So being a child was historically not really a thing. You were too young to work, and then you were old enough to work. You were too young to look after the farm, and then you were old enough to work on the farm. Whereas we have created so much leisure and capital and money that we can have these periods of time that we call a childhood. And ending it at 12 is, I think, way too young. Extending a childhood for as long as you can, like I said, childhood being the one of the greatest parts of a human's life. Like, even we say 18, but if you're wealthy enough to live in a family that can afford to get you through university as well, then you can sort of extend that. And we do have the sort of the gray area of being a teenager, where they don't like to be called children, teenagers, but they're definitely not adults. So it's sort of a transition zone where we slowly introduce responsibility and stuff like that to them. And we don't have that hard cut. We sort of have the hard cut at 18, where, okay, you're an adult now, get out into the world, and like I said, the age of consent in most places is 18. And so that is sort of our hard cutoffs. Putting it at 12 is extremely young. And the narrator even argues that in some US states the age of consent is 12, and people get married at 12, which in the 1950s was true, and I'm sure didn't even change up until very, very recently. And I'm sure you can find states today. I mean, the United States is not a good example for any of this. But yeah, that argument that people in the past did it doesn't jive with me. We need that transition period, that sort of being a teenager, where you start working part-time, you get more responsibilities, you start learning about currency, you start learning about relationships, and you sort of fool around with people your own age who are also just learning about relationships. And then you become an adult at 18, 20, 21, whatever. Anyway, so the actual text of the book, I found it had three main parts. The first part was the hardest to get through. I don't want to say it was like a train wreck in slow motion where you can't look away. I mean, you want to look away the whole time. You want to look away. It's horrible. And it gets to the climax. Forgive me, but it gets to that point where horrible things happen, and then we enter the second phase, where it's like, how far is this going to go? It's gone so far. What is the end goal here? What is this character's plan? And then the final stretch of the book is just like, it's like seeing an animal that was been hit by a car, and you're just like, someone just killed that thing, put it out of its misery. It's just the whole time it's a page turner, in that you want it to end so badly. You're like, just how can this end in any way that will be satisfactory? Just end the suffering. So the format of the book is this man, alias Humbert, who is recounting his actions and his past with this girl, Lolita. Her name's Dolores Hayes, and he's in custody. He's in prison. He's writing this. His trial's upcoming, so he's writing this as sort of his confession, what have you. And there's a foreword to this book, which is by a sort of fictional lawyer or something, who says that he came in possession of this manuscript, and he's publishing it. And in this foreword, which is the only time we get the perspective of a different character, he describes how reprehensible and how horrible and evil this man Humbert is. So it's sort of setting up that this is not a book where you're supposed to empathize at all with the protagonist. And anyone who, I don't know how anyone could going through it, but the first half is leading up to his rape, basically. Leading up to his rape of this girl Dolores. And so he describes his childhood and how his first sexual experience when he was 13 was with this other 13-year-old girl, and their parents tried to keep them apart, because you should keep children apart when they're that age, or they're going to try and do stuff like this. So they have sex, and they're kids. What can you do? But part of it sort of sets up that since that was his first experience, that's what he's been chasing this whole time, is another experience like that with a 13-year-old girl. But the narrator himself sort of mocks that perspective. He is a psychologist in a sense, and he studies psychology, and he's been in many sanatoriums, as he calls it, and he very much mocks them. And he very much mocks Freudian psychoanalytical psychology. Anyway, so that was his first experience, and he describes later, he's born in Switzerland, he's living in Paris. He describes experiences with prostitutes and brothels, and how he's always chasing younger girls, and this one he's prostitute he sleeps with who's 18, but he's pretty sure she claims to be 18, but he says they all say that she's probably like 16, and she was like kind of too old for him. He describes that the perfect age is between 9 and 14, and yeah, he's very unapologetic about himself, and he, like I said, it's very descriptive, and I'm in no way, in recounting this, going to get into the details of what he does and how he feels and what he likes, but the book does. So in the 1940s, he moves to America, and the rest of the book takes place in the US. He does various things, but one of his friends tells him, hey, you should go sort of on vacation, because he's working on a book or a scholarly thing. He's a poet, and tells him, hey, you should go live with this family I know. They've got room. It's just a mother and father and their 12-year-old daughter. And because of the 12-year-old daughter, he agrees, yeah, sure, I'll go live with them. That'll be great. So he goes to live with them. Turns out their house just burned down and they can't put him up. So he's really depressed. But they said, hey, there's this other woman. She's a widow. You can stay with her. And he's like, I don't want to live with some old widow. And so the widow's showing him his house, and she has this housemaid named Louise. And one of the bedrooms she shows him, she says, this is Lo's room. And he assumes that's Lo, the housemaid. And then he's trying to think of excuses to leave, and he's planning, he's just going to get out and run. There's no way he's staying here. And then in the backyard, he finds Lo, which is short for Dolores, which is the 12-year-old daughter of this widow. And then, of course, he decides to stay. And the whole next section becomes, how can he corrupt and have his way with this 12-year-old girl? He's 37 at the time, which kind of matters for the plot, but even if he was 20, the age gap doesn't matter at a certain point. And so he describes himself as being a very attractive male, and Dolores sort of has a crush on him, as teenagers do, and young people, preteens. But also her mother, Charlotte Hayes, the landlady, has a thing for this man. And so at one point she says, hey, I'm in love with you, either we'll get married or get out of my house, sort of thing. Gives him this weird ultimatum. And he's like, I don't want to marry this old woman. She's not that old. She's like around his age. But then he thinks, he has like some convoluted thought of how this can get him closer to Dolores and get him closer to what he wants. And so he agrees to marry her. At one point, because Charlotte doesn't really like her daughter, or doesn't get along with her daughter, she sends her daughter off to summer camp for months and months. And this really upsets Humbert. He says that from 9 to 14 is such a short period of time, and now he's losing 2 months without her, and it's rough. Anyways, while she's at camp, the main character, he gets a bunch of sleeping pills, and he tests them out on the mother, and his plan is to use them on both the mother and the daughter, and so when they're not out cold, he can have his way with the girl, and sort of that's his plan. His plan then becomes he's going to kill the mother, he's going to drown her, and it's like this perfect scenario is set up in this lake where they're swimming, and he could have drowned her, but he sort of chickens out, and so he doesn't. But it just shows how evil this man is. I mean, sure, he didn't go along with it, but the fact that this is all he's thinking about is his sort of base carnal needs over the lives of these other people. And he's been keeping a diary this whole time because he almost wants to get caught. Anyways, keeping a diary of his feelings for this 12-year-old girl. And the mother comes across the diary. She knows he's hiding something from her. She finds the diary. And of course, she's just like horrified. Like, you have these thoughts about my daughter. You have these plans for my daughter. How dare you? Like, get out of the house. And he's like, I'm caught. The game's up, whatever. So she's frantically writing letters to people to warn them, and she runs out the door, and she's so distraught, she's running for the mailbox that she doesn't see a car coming, comes around the corner, hits her, and kills her. And so at that moment when this man should have been caught, he is now not just free, but because he has married this woman months before, he is now the quote-unquote illegal guardian of Dolores. So he's now her stepfather. She has no one else in the world but him. So he goes off to camp, picks her up from camp, and he doesn't tell her that her mother's dead. He tells her that she's very sick. And I'm like, just why wouldn't you tell her? And this begins a year-long road trip across the United States. And the worst is the first night. And this is what I'm talking about. This is the sort of culminating point of the first section of this novel, is when they get to a hotel and he drugs her with the sleeping pill. And then as she's like passed out in bed, he's down in the hotel thinking about what he's going to do to her. And then he finally goes up to the room, goes inside, and pills didn't work. She's asleep, but she like wakes up throughout the night. And so he's laying there in bed sort of with this temptation next to him. And anyways, the following morning, we think Dolores has dodged a bullet, but she talks about what she did at camp and how she lost her virginity at camp, because there was this 13-year-old boy there, and he and this other girl, they would have sex all the time, and she would be on lookout for them. And then like a few times she would join in, and it turned out that basically every morning when they went off to do this chores, she would have sex with this boy. Which, you know, she's 12, he's 13. This stuff happens with kids. But because of this, because she's not a virgin, he sort of uses this as a claim that he didn't corrupt her. She was already corrupt. And in relaying this story about her having sex, the conversation of sex comes up, and she sort of, I don't want to say she seduces him, but, and I can't say she's willing. I mean, she is willing, but because of her age, she cannot willingly consent, because she is a 12-year-old girl and she has no idea of the consequences and what she's getting herself into. But that morning, he rapes her multiple times. And that's sort of the end of the first part of the book, and the beginning of this long drawn out horrible section that just gets worse and worse and worse. So like I said, they go on this road trip, jumping from hotel to hotel, motel to motel, across the US, east to west, north to south, all over the place. And early on they get into fights, and she calls for her mother. Actually, the first day after the initial rape, she complains of pains in her abdomen, and claims that he ripped something or broke something inside of her, and rushes off to the first washroom at the first gas station. And that's I guess that's her first period that she had after this rape, which is just really the whole time the author is trying to defend himself in a way, but again and again as the book goes on, I don't know if he becomes more aware of the horrible things that he's done, but the book lays it out for the reader that the more and more just how reprehensible these actions have been. Anyways, they get into a fight, and she wants to go to her mother, and he says, "Your mother's dead." And she has a fit and cries and is distraught, as you would be, but in the end she crawls back into his arms at night, and he says, because she had nowhere else to go. And it's just heartbreaking that this poor little girl is stuck with this man. And his sort of joy and elation of getting what he wants from her sort of dies off at this point. He uses and abuses her perpetually for the next number of years, but he adds little details, and we get just little glimpses of the experience of Dolores. And I think this is really a story about Dolores and how she sort of cries herself to sleep every night. And at one point he even says that this other man broke her heart, but Humbert broke her life, and how he stole her childhood away, and that stuff like that sort of come out the further on we go, and it just gets more and more depressing. And so after this sort of joyride across America, they settle down in this place, and she goes to school, but the teachers have meetings with him as her father, and says stuff like she's not developing properly, she's got weird behavioral issues, there's something clearly going wrong. And they're all very Freudian and psychoanalytical, and they're all like, it must have something to do with sex, which obviously it does, because this poor little girl's been raped by her stepfather again and again and again. She's basically a sex slave to this man. And they have this huge fight at one point, and she says, "Let's just get on the road again and have another joyride, but this time we're going where I want to go." And it's revealed later that she has met another much older man, one who has also known her since she was 10 and has sort of had a thing for little girls. And she's made a plan with this man to sort of escape from Humbert. And the reason she sticked with him this whole time is because he's been blackmailing her. He's saying, like, if you ever tell anyone, or if you ever call the cops, like, you'll be put in a home, and you'll be locked away, and you'll lose all your freedom, and it'll be horrible for you. So this is, I guess, her plan to get out. So they go on this road trip, and when they had been living in this town, Humbert had been extremely jealous of her and would not let her spend any time with boys, would not let her do any of the normal things normal girls do, and sort of very kept her very sheltered and safe for him, all for himself. And so on this journey across America, he gets very paranoid that they're being followed. He keeps seeing the same sort of script in these names written in the same handwriting at different hotels, and all the names are sort of puns, and they're taunting him, and he feels like he's going crazy, but he can't help but feel that there's someone following them. A few times Dolores sort of escapes him, but then comes back an hour or so later, and it's sort of clear that she's had sex with someone or been raped by someone, and he's so jealous, and he's really upset. He hits her, and he physically abuses her in other ways a few times. There are other, like, I'm not going to get into details, but there are other times when, like, she has a fever, and she's, like, really, really sick, and he still rapes her and describes how her skin and body feels while she's, like, coughing and dying. But another time she gets really sick and she's in the hospital. He also catches the cold or the flu or whatever it was from her, but he's in his hotel room. When he finally gets better and goes to the hospital to see how she's doing, doctors and nurses reveal that her uncle picked her up. Your brother, he came and took her, and of course he doesn't have a brother. He comes to the conclusion that it's this man that has been following them this whole time. And then we get to the final section of the book, where he sort of chases after and tries to find her and this man, and he has this gun. He really wants to kill this man, but he can't find her, and so he eventually sort of settles down, and he spends time with this other woman and goes on with his life. He continues to sort of look at other children in a disgusting way, but at the end he gets a message from Dolores, who calls herself Mrs. Richard Schiller. She's married. She reveals that she's pregnant. At this time she's 17, going on 18, but she says, hey, I need money. We're moving up to Alaska, but we're broke. Can you just send us some money? I'm not going to tell you where we live because I don't trust you, but send us some money. And so, of course, he tracks down where she lives. He gets the gun. He goes into the house and finds her there, very pregnant. But and a thing about her pregnancy is, like, this whole time I'm thinking, what's your end game? He said multiple times that after 14 he loses interest in girls. So at one point he describes how his plan is to get her pregnant, and then in 14 or 12 years their daughter will be old enough that he can then abuse her, and even discusses, like, their grandchild, and he sort of has that's part of his plan. Anyway, so he finds her in this sort of hovel, this very poor place. She's married to this World War II vet who's, like, they're very poor, but anyway, she seems happy, and like, he's going to kill the husband, and she's like, no, this isn't the guy that stole me away, and she reveals that it was this whole time, it was this playwright, this man that she'd known since she was a little girl, and how she made a plan to run away with him, and she did, but then this man had, like, very strange and bizarre, almost sadistic tastes, and she was like, I'm not into this, and so she ran away from him and was sort of like a washerwoman at diners, and then that's how she met her husband and got married, and she seems sort of happy, I guess. And so Humbert, realizing that this isn't the man he wants to kill, he gives her, she wants $400, and he says, like, if I give it to you, will you come with me? He wants her to sort of come back with him and sort of live the rest of her life with him. But she takes it as, oh, you want me to go back to the hotel with you and then you'll give me the $400? Like, that's how sort of ruined she is that's where her mind goes. He says, no, I'm going to give you the money. I just please, is there any chance you'll ever be with me? And she's like, no. And she says things like, you were a good dad and stuff, but I mean, clearly he wasn't. You feel so bad for Dolores. And so he gives her the money and leaves, and he's so distraught. He tracks down this man, Q. He has a huge tussle, and there's a huge fight, and he shoots the guy a million times, and then he gets back in his car and sort of drives until the cops sort of take him off the road, and he's sort of losing his sanity at this point, if he was ever sane. And then he gets taken into custody, and that's how it ends. And he says, it's weird. The book is written in 1955. It takes place in the late 1940s up to early 50s. But he makes references to the year 2000 or the year 2020 when he thinks Dolores will die. And he's like, I don't want this ever published to then. So people in the year 2020 reading this book, like everyone that in this book is dead. It's very strange reading it in 2025. Anyway, so he made a stipulation in his will that this should not be published until both he and Dolores are dead. So it's like, well, why was it published in the 1950s? And of course, this is a fictional account. But I went back and read the foreword, and it reveals that Humbert dies months after writing this due to heart problems before he even goes to trial. And the most tragic line of all, that when you're reading it the first time, you don't pick up on it. You will pick up on that. The author, Humbert, he dies soon after writing it, but the foreword says that Mrs. Richard F. Schiller died in childbirth, giving birth to a stillborn girl on Christmas Day, 1952, in Graystar, a settlement in the remote Northwest. So after all of this, Dolores dies in childbirth, and her child doesn't survive in Alaska. So her whole life, her whole family, it was all taken away. It was all destroyed by this man Humbert. If it wasn't for Humbert, her mother wouldn't have died in the car accident. She wouldn't have gotten pregnant at 17. She wouldn't have had so many developmental issues. It's described how she was a brilliant tennis player, and how even Humbert himself says if I hadn't have destroyed her, she could have been a world star tennis player. So the whole thing is just so tragic. Especially the fact that she doesn't get to live happily ever after in Alaska with her new family. She dies, and she doesn't even have a child, and it's just it's such a horrible book, but it is very, very well written. And I don't know that I will recommend it provisionally, that you need to be someone strong enough, and I'm not saying strong enough like it's a bad thing that if you're not strong enough, but you need to be someone that can read this and won't be too affected by it. But it's so hard seeing through the eyes of someone that at the end of the book he says how he only cared about his own desires. He had no thought at all about Dolores' needs, mental, physical, whatever. He was an awful stepfather. I mean, you can't even attach the title of father to him. Like I said, the writing is very witty. It's very clever. The words, the poetry, there's so much in this that is just incredible writing. And I'd love to read something else by Nabokov that, I don't know, just anything at all, because really well written. But wow, what a subject matter. And it's crazy that this was written. And it's funny, at the end of the book there's a sort of an afterword by the author himself, who talks about sort of the troubles of getting this published. And I gotta read this line, because he talks about how there are 3 things in American publishing that are impossible to get published. The first being a book like this, I assume a book of a sexual nature, because that's another thing of, like, you think written in the 1950s. To me, 1950s America is very non-sexual, or very sort of keep that sort of thing hidden, almost Victorian. But this book is intensely sexual, like full of innuendos and descriptions and things that seem very anachronistic for the 1950s. So he says that their refusal to buy the book was based not on my treatment of the theme, but on the theme itself. For there are at least 3 themes which are utterly taboo as far as most American publishers are concerned. The other 2 are a black-white marriage, which is a complete and glorious success resulting in lots of children and grandchildren. So, of course, America is intensely racist in the 1950s. 70 years on, I don't think they're that much different. And so a marriage between a black and a white person that is complete and glorious success resulting in lots of children and grandchildren, and they live happily ever after. You can't write that. That's the taboo in America. And the other one being the total atheist who lives a happy and useful life and dies in his sleep at the age of 106. Which I think that's changed. But yeah, an atheist living a long and happy life. Can't write about that either. But that's what I mean. Like, the author is so witty. He's so funny. And it's so bizarre to see that sort of wit and humor and cleverness in not just this subject matter, but presented through a narrator who is such an evil person. But yeah, like I said, just to repeat myself, the fact that the author can write this whole book from the perspective of this man, and this man trying to defend himself, and yet you do not get behind this man and do not agree with him, is just masterful writing. So that was the intensely challenging Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov.